Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he crawled through the narrow maintenance tunnel on level 7 of Station Kepler 7. The air recycling system down here had been acting up for weeks, and nobody else wanted to make the trip into the forgotten depths of the station. Jake didn't mind the dirty work. He had been fixing things since he was a kid, and the quiet solitude of maintenance duty helped him forget about the nightmares that still came from his time in the war. The station hummed around him as he checked each connection point along the tunnel. Most people on Kepler 7 never came down this far. The upper levels had all the important stuff like living quarters, command centers, and research labs. Down here in the bowels of the station, there was nothing but old equipment and storage rooms that hadn't been opened in years. Jake's scanner beeped as he reached Junction Point 77 Alpha. The readings looked strange. There was more power flowing through this section than there should be, and the air composition was different too. He frowned and checked his equipment again. The numbers didn't lie. Something down here was using a lot of energy and pumping out oxygen at a much higher rate than normal. He followed the power conduit deeper into the station until he reached a section that wasn't on any of the official blueprints. The walls here looked newer, and there were security cameras that definitely weren't supposed to be there. Jake's military training kicked in as he noticed the cameras had been carefully positioned to watch the corridor from every angle. The power trail led to a heavy door, marked with biohazard symbols. Jake tried his maintenance access code, but the door stayed locked. He pulled out his emergency override tool and went to work on the control panel. After 10 minutes of careful rewiring, the door finally opened with a soft hiss. The room beyond was dark, except for a few blinking lights. Jake stepped inside and immediately knew he had found something he wasn't supposed to see. The walls were lined with equipment that looked like medical scanners and life support systems. In the center of the room was a glass cage about the size of a small bedroom. Inside the cage, something moved. Jake's flashlight beam swept across the enclosure and stopped on a small figure huddled in the corner. At first he thought it might be a child, but as his eyes adjusted to the light, he realized it was something else entirely. The being had blue-gray skin that looked almost translucent, and large dark eyes that reflected his flashlight like a cat's. It was definitely not human. The creature was clearly sick. Its breathing was shallow and labored, and there were strange marks on its arms that looked like injection sites. It wore a simple gray outfit that was too big for its small frame. When Jake moved closer to the glass, the being looked up at him with those huge dark eyes, and he saw something there that made his chest tighten. Fear, pain, and something else. Hope. Jake had seen enough wounded soldiers to recognize when someone was dying. This alien child, because that's what it had to be, didn't have much time left. The life support readings on the walls showed critically low levels for several important systems. Someone or something had been keeping this being alive, but just barely. He tried to find a way to open the cage, but the controls were locked behind a security system that was way beyond his maintenance clearance. Jake pulled out his communicator to call for help, but the signal was being blocked. Even his emergency channel wasn't working. The room had been designed to keep secrets. Jake was still trying to figure out what to do when he heard footsteps in the corridor outside. He quickly turned off his flashlight and hid behind one of the larger machines just as the door opened. Dr. Helen Torres walked in, followed by 2 security guards. Jake didn't recognize they weren't wearing the usual station security uniforms. Dr. Torres went straight to a control panel and began checking readings. She was talking to someone through a private communicator, but Jake could only catch pieces of the conversation. He heard words like specimen, deterioration, and disposal. Schedule. The tone of her voice made it clear that she was talking about the alien in the cage like it was a piece of broken equipment. One of the guards asked if they should terminate the subject, since it was clearly dying anyway. Dr. Torres shook her head and said that the assembly inspectors would want to see it alive when they arrived next week. After that, she said, they could proceed with the final dissection. Jake felt sick. He had spent 2 years fighting in a war that was supposed to be about protecting innocent people from harm. Now he was listening to humans' plan to kill what was obviously a helpless prisoner. When Dr. Torres and her guards finally left, Jake waited a full 10 minutes before moving from his hiding spot. He approached the cage again and looked down at the alien child. It had watched the entire exchange, and Jake could see in its eyes that it understood what was going to happen. The being lifted one thin hand and pressed it against the glass. Jake put his own hand on the other side, matching the position. In that moment, Jake Morrison made a decision that would change everything. He didn't care about regulations, or chain of command, or whatever classified project this was supposed to be. A child was dying in a cage, and he was the only person who seemed to give a damn about that fact. He spent the next hour studying the cage's security system and the life support equipment. His military engineering background helped him understand the basic setup, even if some of the technology was beyond anything he had seen before. The alien watched him work, those dark eyes following his every movement. Jake couldn't open the cage yet, but he could improve the life support settings. He carefully adjusted the oxygen mixture and increased the power to the heating system. The alien's breathing became a little easier almost immediately. Before he left, Jake knelt down next to the cage and spoke softly to the being inside. He told it that his name was Jake and that he was going to help. He didn't know if it could understand him, but he hoped his tone of voice would get the message across. The alien tilted its head and made a soft sound that might have been an attempt at speech. Then it pointed to itself and said something that sounded like Zara. Jake smiled and repeated the name back. Zara nodded and pressed her hand against the glass again. Jake Morrison left the hidden laboratory that night, knowing that he had just committed himself to something that could get him killed, or worse. But as he crawled back through the maintenance tunnels toward his quarters, he kept thinking about those dark eyes and the trust he had seen there. Some things were worth the risk. Jake returned to the hidden laboratory every night for a week. Each time, he brought something small that might help Zara feel more comfortable. A blanket from his own quarters, some fruit from the mess hall, a small music player with gentle melodies that seemed to calm her when the pain got bad. Zara was definitely getting stronger with the improved life support settings, but Jake could see that she needed real medical attention. The injection marks on her arms were infected, and sometimes she would curl up in obvious pain from whatever had been done to her. Jake knew enough basic first aid to help a little, but this was beyond his skills. He had been avoiding involving anyone else, because he didn't know who could be trusted. Dr. Torres obviously knew about Zara, and was planning to kill her. The security guards who came with her weren't regular station personnel. For all Jake knew, half the command staff might be involved in whatever this project was, but Zara was running out of time, and Jake couldn't watch her suffer when there might be someone who could help. Lisa Grant had been the station's medical officer for 3 years. Jake had always respected her because she actually cared about the people she treated, instead of just going through the motions. She had patched him up a few times after maintenance accidents, and she never asked too many questions about how he had gotten hurt. More importantly, she had served on frontier colonies, where she had seen some of the uglier sides of human expansion. If anyone might understand what Jake had found, it would be Lisa. Jake waited until Lisa was finishing her shift in the medical bay before approaching her. He told her that he had found someone who needed help, but couldn't come to the official medical facilities. Lisa's first assumption was that Jake had discovered an injured smuggler, or maybe someone who was hiding from the law. When he told her that it was more complicated than that, she agreed to follow him down to level 7. Lisa's reaction when she saw Zara was everything Jake had hoped for. Instead of panic or fear, her medical training took over immediately. She knelt down next to the cage and began examining Zara through the glass, talking to her in the calm voice she used with frightened patience. What Lisa saw made her angry. in a way that Jake had never witnessed before. The injection marks weren't just signs of medical treatment. They were evidence of experimentation. Someone had been using Zara as a test subject for procedures that would have been illegal to perform on any sentient being. Lisa found scars that showed where tissue samples had been taken. She found evidence of genetic modification attempts that had clearly caused Zara significant pain. Most disturbing of all, she found signs that Zara had been subjected to these experiments for years, probably since she was much younger. While Lisa worked on figuring out how to treat Zara's immediate medical problems, Jake told her about Dr. Torres and the conversation he had overheard. Lisa listened with growing horror as Jake explained that Zara was scheduled to be dissected when some kind of inspection team arrived. Lisa had heard rumors about classified research projects on Kepler-7, but she had always assumed they involved weapons development or maybe communication technology. The idea that her own station was being used to torture an alien child made her feel sick. She immediately began working on a way to get Zara proper medical care without alerting Dr. Torres. Over the next several days, Lisa snuck medical supplies down to level 7 whenever she could. She couldn't risk bringing Zara to the medical bay, but she could at least treat the infections and give her something for the pain. As she worked, she began to piece together what Zara's species might be. The blue-gray skin and large eyes matched descriptions. Lisa had read in xenobiology texts about a species called the Villani. According to official records, the Villani had gone extinct about 20 years ago from some kind of plague. But Zara was definitely alive, and she was definitely VE. Lisa began to suspect that the official story about the Villani extinction might not be the whole truth. If Zara was the last of her kind, that would explain why she was so valuable to whoever was running these experiments. It would also explain why her existence had to be kept secret. As Lisa spent more time with Zara, she began to notice something unusual about her patient. Zara seemed to know when Lisa was upset or worried, even when Lisa tried to hide her emotions. When Lisa was frustrated with a difficult medical procedure, Zara would make soft sounds that seemed intended to comfort her. When Lisa was angry about what had been done to Zara, the alien child would touch the glass and shake her head, as if trying to tell Lisa not to be sad. Jake noticed it too. Zara always seemed to know when he was having a bad day, or when his war nightmares had kept him awake. There was something almost supernatural about the way she could read human emotions. But it felt natural rather than threatening. Jake began to wonder if empathy was a natural ability for Zara's species. The breakthrough came when Lisa was trying to communicate with Zara about a painful medical procedure. Zara suddenly pressed both hands against the glass and looked directly into Lisa's eyes. For just a moment, Lisa felt what Zara was feeling. The physical pain from the infected injection sites, the emotional trauma from years of experiments, but also gratitude and trust and something that felt like hope. Lisa stumbled backward from the cage, shocked by the intensity of the experience. Zara looked concerned and made apologetic sounds, as if she hadn't meant to share so much. But Lisa realized that this empathic ability explained how Zara had survived years of torture. She could sense the emotions of her captors and respond in ways that kept them from hurting her worse than they already had. It also explained why Jake and Lisa both felt so protective of her. Zara's empathic abilities made her emotional pain as real to them as their own. They weren't just seeing a suffering alien child. They were feeling her suffering as if it was their own. While Lisa worked on treating Zara's physical problems, Jake continued to gather information about the project that had brought her to Kepler-7. He used his maintenance access to explore other restricted areas of the station and found evidence of similar laboratories that had been used in the past. Equipment logs showed shipments of biological specimens that dated back several years. Jake also discovered that Dr. Torres reported to someone off-station through encrypted communications. Whatever project Zara was part of, it was bigger than just Kepler-7. There were probably other stations and other prisoners. The worst discovery came when Jake found archived video logs from Zara's early days in captivity. The recordings showed a much younger Zara being brought to the station, along with several other members of her species. The others had died during the early experiments, leaving Zara as the sole survivor. She had watched her family and friends die one by one while the researchers took notes. Jake couldn't bring himself to show the recordings to Lisa, but he told her what he had found. Lisa cried that night for the first time since Jake had known her. She had seen plenty of suffering in her career, but there was something especially heartbreaking about watching a child lose everyone she cared about while being powerless to help them. Both Jake and Lisa knew that they were running out of time. Dr. Torres had mentioned that the inspection team would arrive soon, and after that, Zara would be killed. They had managed to improve her health and make her more comfortable, but they still hadn't figured out how to free her from the cage. More importantly, they were starting to realize that even if they could free Zara, they had nowhere to take her. The entire Galactic Assembly apparently believed that her species was extinct. If they tried to turn her over to the authorities, she would probably end up in another laboratory, or worse. Jake and Lisa began to discuss the possibility of stealing a shuttle and trying to reach human space. It would mean abandoning their careers and probably becoming fugitives. But they couldn't think of any other way to keep Zara safe as they made their plans. Neither of them noticed that Commander Roy Blake had begun to ask questions about their unusual behavior. Blake had noticed that his medical officer and his maintenance chief were spending a lot of time together and seemed to be working on some kind of secret project. He had started his own investigation to find out what they were up to. Blake's investigation was about to lead him to the same hidden laboratory that Jake had discovered, and when that happened, everything would change. Commander Roy Blake had always prided himself on knowing everything that happened on his station. When he noticed Jake Morrison and Lisa Grant acting strangely, he decided to find out what they were hiding. Blake followed the same power readings that had led Jake to the hidden laboratory, but unlike Jake, he had command access codes that opened doors without any rewiring. Blake's first reaction when he saw Zara was pure shock. His second reaction was rage. He had been commanding Kepler-7 for 5 years, without ever knowing that there was a torture chamber in his station's basement. Someone had been conducting illegal experiments right under his nose, and they had hidden it so well that he never suspected a thing. Jake and Lisa were both in the laboratory when Blake arrived. They expected to be arrested immediately, but Blake surprised them by asking what medical attention Zara needed. When Lisa explained Zara's condition and the treatment she had been providing, Blake listened carefully and asked intelligent questions. It became clear that he was more concerned about Zara's welfare than about the regulations. His officers had broken. Blake told them that he had been receiving pressure from Galactic Assembly officials to prepare for some kind of inspection. Now, he understood what they wanted to inspect. He had been helping to cover up a war crime without even knowing it. Blake's investigation into the project files revealed the full scope of what had been done. Project Sanctuary was supposed to be a humanitarian effort to preserve the last members of extinct species. In reality, it was a weapons development program that used torture and experimentation to turn the survivors into biological weapons. The Villani had been targeted because of their natural empathic abilities. The assemblies. Scientists believed they could weaponize this empathy to create perfect interrogators or even mind-controlled devices. When the Villani refused to cooperate with the weapons program, the Assembly had declared them a security threat and systematically exterminated them. Zara was the last Villani in the galaxy, and she existed only because the researchers needed a living subject to continue their experiments. Once they had learned everything they could from her, she would be dissected, and her remains would be studied to find ways to recreate her abilities artificially. Blake discovered that the inspection team was due to arrive in 3 days. Dr. Torres had already prepared the final dissection protocols. If they were going to save Zara, they had to act immediately. The problem was that there was nowhere to go. Every human colony was part of the Galactic Assembly. Every space station and every planet would turn Zara over to the authorities if they found her. The Assembly's propaganda had convinced most of the galaxy that species like the Villani had been dangerous and their extinction was necessary for galactic peace. Jake proposed stealing one of the station's shuttles and heading for the Outer Rim, territories where human miners and traders operated outside of Assembly jurisdiction. It was a desperate plan with little chance of success, but it was better than letting Zara die in a laboratory. Blake made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Instead of stopping the escape plan, he decided to help. He used his command access to disable the security sensors around the shuttle bay, and provided Jake with navigation codes for the Outer Rim. Blake knew that helping them would end his career and probably land him in prison. But he couldn't live with himself if he let an innocent child be murdered on his station. The escape plan went wrong almost immediately. Dr. Torres had been monitoring Blake's access to the classified files, and she triggered emergency lockdown protocols as soon as Jake and Zara reached the shuttle bay. Blast doors sealed all the exits, and security forces surrounded the area. Jake found himself trapped with Zara in a small maintenance area near the shuttle bay. He had his service weapon, but they were outnumbered 20-1. Jake prepared to make a final stand, knowing that at least he could prevent them from taking Zara alive for more experiments. That was when Zara did something that nobody expected. She pressed her hands against the wall of the maintenance area and closed her eyes in concentration. Jake watched in amazement as the lights in the corridor outside began to flicker and change. The security locks on nearby doors started opening and closing randomly. Even the environmental controls seemed to be responding to Zara's touch. Zara opened her eyes and looked at Jake with an expression that seemed to say she was sorry for not telling him about this ability earlier. She had been hiding the fact that her empathic connection extended beyond living beings to include the electronic systems around her. She could feel the electrical patterns in the station's computers, the same way she could feel emotions in people's minds. Using this ability, Zara guided Jake through maintenance shafts and service corridors that avoided the security forces. She could sense where the guards were positioned by feeling their emotional states through the station's walls. She could also manipulate the electronic locks and sensors to keep them hidden. They made it to a secondary shuttle bay that wasn't being watched as carefully. Jake had never piloted anything larger than an atmospheric transport, but he had studied the basics of space navigation during his military service. With Zara's ability to interface with the shuttle's computer systems, they might actually have a chance. The shuttle launch triggered every alarm on the station. Dr. Torres ordered the defense systems to fire on them, but Zara's connection to the station's computers allowed her to disable the weapons targeting systems. Jake pushed the shuttle's engines to their maximum as they headed for the nearest asteroid field. Assembly patrol ships responded to the alert within minutes. Jake's military experience helped him navigate through the asteroids, but their shuttle was damaged by weapons fire and they were losing power. Jake managed to crash land on a small mining asteroid, where human prospectors were working claims that were barely profitable enough to maintain. The miners who found Jake and Zara were suspicious. At first, they had never seen an alien before, and they were worried about getting in trouble with the assembly. But when one of the miners was injured in a cave-in caused by the shuttle's crash, Zara stepped forward to help. Using her empathic abilities, Zara could sense exactly where the injured miner was trapped under tons of rock. She guided the rescue team to his location and then used her emotional connection to keep him calm while they dug him out. When they finally reached him, Zara was able to tell them about his internal injuries before any medical scans were performed. The miner's leader was an older woman named Carol Stone, who had been working the asteroids for 30 years. Carol had seen enough of the galaxy to know that the Assembly's version of events wasn't always the truth. When Jake explained what had been done to Zara, Carol became protective of her in the same way that Jake and Lisa had. Carol's crew had their own reasons to distrust the Assembly. The mining companies they worked for routinely abandoned crews when the claims stopped being profitable. The miners had learned to take care of each other because nobody else would. They understood what it meant to be thrown away by people who saw you as disposable. Over the next few days, while they waited for Jake to repair their shuttle, Zara helped the miners in ways that amazed them. She could sense structural weaknesses in the asteroid that might cause dangerous cave-ins. She could feel when someone was getting sick before they showed any symptoms. She could even help locate new mineral deposits by sensing the different electrical patterns in various types of rock. The miners began to see Zara not as an alien threat but as a child who had survived something terrible and was trying to help the people who had shown her kindness. They started calling her Little Guardian because of the way she watched out for everyone's safety. Carol told Jake that she had contacts in the Outer Rim who might be able to help them reach human space. There were colonies and trading posts beyond Assembly control where Zara might be safe. It would mean living as fugitives, but at least Zara would be alive and free. Jake agreed to the plan, but he also knew that their escape had probably triggered a galaxy-wide manhunt. The Assembly would never stop looking for them, and everywhere they went, they would be putting innocent people at risk. What Jake didn't know was that their story was already spreading through the underground networks that connected miners, traders, and other people who lived outside the official channels. The image of a human maintenance worker risking everything to save an alien child was inspiring people who had their own reasons to distrust the Assembly. Dr. Torres had made a mistake when she classified Jake as a terrorist and put bounties on both him and Zara. The bounty notices included enough details about Zara's situation to make it clear that she was an innocent victim rather than a dangerous criminal. People started asking questions about why the Assembly was so desperate to recapture one small alien child. Blake and Lisa had also been arrested, but they used their imprisonment to leak more information about Project Sanctuary to human news networks. The classified files they shared revealed the existence of other hidden laboratories and other survivors of supposedly extinct species. As Jake and Zara prepared to leave the mining asteroid, they had no idea that their escape had already started, something much larger than either of them could have imagined. The galaxy was beginning to learn the truth about what the Assembly had been doing in the name of peace and security, and many people didn't like what they were hearing. The news about Zara spread through the galaxy faster than anyone expected. Carol Stone's mining crew had contacts throughout the Outer Rim territories, and those contacts had their own networks of friends and allies. Within a week, half the galaxy had heard about the human who risked everything to save an alien child. From a secret torture chamber, Jake watched the news reports from their hiding place on the mining asteroid with growing amazement. He had expected to be branded as a terrorist and forgotten. Instead, he was being called a hero by people he had never met. More importantly, Zara's story was causing people to ask uncomfortable questions about the Galactic Assembly's official version of recent history. The Assembly's response was swift and predictable. They declared Jake Morrison a dangerous fugitive who had stolen classified military assets. They claimed that Zara was a biological weapon that posed a threat to galactic security. They offered massive rewards for information leading to their capture and warned that anyone helping them would be treated as an accomplice to terrorism. But the Assembly's propaganda campaign backfired badly. The leaked files from Project Sanctuary had already shown the galaxy what kind of threat Zara actually represented. Videos of her helping injured miners and using her abilities to prevent cave-ins made it obvious that she was a child, not a weapon. The more the Assembly insisted that she was dangerous, the more people suspected they were lying about other things too. Dr. Torres found herself under investigation by her own superiors When the extent of the security breach became clear, she had allowed classified information to leak to the press, lost the most valuable research subject in the project, and triggered a public relations disaster that was damaging the Assembly's credibility throughout the galaxy. In desperation, Dr. Torres contacted Admiral Vexhai of the Reptilian Dominion and requested military assistance in recapturing Zara. She claimed that Jake Morrison was part of a human conspiracy to steal Assembly technology, and that Zara was a crucial strategic asset that could not be allowed to fall into enemy hands. Admiral Vexhai was skeptical of Dr. Torres' claims, but he was also curious about this human who had caused so much trouble. The Reptilian Dominion had been watching humanity's expansion into space with interest, and they were impressed by the stubborn courage that humans showed when protecting their own people. Vexhai wanted to see if this Jake Morrison was representative of his species or just an unusual individual. When Vexhai's fleet arrived at the mining asteroid, Carol Stone and her crew faced an impossible choice. They could fight a hopeless battle against superior forces, or they could surrender Jake and Zara to save their own lives. The miners chose to fight, but Zara made a different decision. Zara walked out of the asteroid's shelter and surrendered herself to the Dominion forces. She couldn't bear to watch more innocent people die because of her. But before she allowed herself to be taken prisoner, she did something that changed everything, using her empathic abilities. Zara shared her memories with every human on the asteroid, not just her recent experiences with Jake and Lisa, but her entire life story. The miners felt what it was like to watch her family and friends die in the laboratories. They experienced the years of pain and fear and loneliness. They felt her desperate hope when Jake first appeared, and her growing trust in the humans who had shown her kindness. These shared memories spread through human communication networks like a virus. Every person who experienced Zara's memories felt compelled to share them with others. Within days, millions of humans throughout the galaxy had experienced the Villani genocide from the perspective of its last survivor. The impact was devastating. Humans had joined the Galactic Assembly believing it was a force for peace and cooperation among the stars. Now, they were seeing evidence that their government had participated in the systematic extermination of an entire species for refusing to cooperate with weapons development programs. Jake refused to abandon Zara and managed to stow away aboard Admiral Vexhai's flagship. His military training helped him avoid the ship's security systems, and he spent several days hiding in maintenance areas while the ship traveled toward the Assembly capital world. Jake's exploration of the Dominion ship revealed something disturbing. Vexhai wasn't just transporting Zara to the Assembly. He was carrying other prisoners as well. Beings that Jake didn't recognize but who showed the same signs of long-term experimentation that he had seen on Zara. Using the ship's computer systems, Jake discovered that there were dozens of hidden facilities throughout Assembly space. Each one contained the last survivors of species that were officially extinct. The Assembly had been systematically destroying any civilization that refused to cooperate with their expansion, then keeping a few survivors for research purposes. Jake realized that Zara wasn't unique. She was just the first survivor to escape and tell her story. There were others like her throughout the galaxy, and they were all scheduled for eventual termination once the researchers finished studying them. Meanwhile, back on Earth, the human government was facing a crisis of legitimacy. Protests erupted in major cities as citizens demanded answers about humanity's participation in the Assembly's genocide programs. Admiral Kate Ross of the Earth Defense Fleet found herself under pressure to take action, but she was constrained by humanity's treaties with the Assembly. Lisa Grant and Commander Blake used their imprisonment to continue leaking classified information. Blake had discovered that several other human stations were involved in similar projects, and he provided the media with detailed evidence of the Assembly's crimes. Lisa shared her medical analysis of Zara's condition, providing scientific proof. of the torture that had been inflicted on her. The leaks revealed that Project Sanctuary was just one part of a larger program designed to eliminate any species that might challenge the Assembly's dominance. The Assembly had been using humanitarian rhetoric to cover up what was essentially a galaxy-wide extermination campaign. Public opinion began to shift dramatically as more evidence emerged. Species that had previously supported the Assembly started to question whether their own cooperation had enabled genocide. The insectoid hive mind began conducting their own investigation into the Assembly's activities. Several minor species threatened to withdraw from the Assembly entirely. Jake's infiltration of Vex High's ship was finally discovered when he attempted to communicate with Zara. Instead of turning him over to the ship's security forces, Admiral Vex High arranged a private meeting. The reptilian admiral was curious about the human who had risked so much for an alien child. Vex High told Jake that the Dominion had suspected the Assembly of conducting illegal research, but they had never found proof. Jake's evidence confirmed their worst fears about the Assembly's true nature. Vex High also revealed that the Dominion had been protecting refugees from several supposedly extinct species, hiding them in remote colonies where the Assembly couldn't find them. The Admiral offered Jake a deal. If he could provide more evidence about the Assembly's hidden facilities, the Dominion would help him rescue the other survivors. It would mean working with a foreign military against his own government, but Jake had already crossed that line when he decided to save Zara. As Vex High's ship approached the Assembly capital world, Jake prepared for the most dangerous mission of his life. He knew that the Assembly had no intention of negotiating for Zara's release. They planned to execute her publicly as a warning to anyone who might challenge their authority. But Jake also knew that he wouldn't be acting alone. The shared memories that Zara had given to the miners were still spreading throughout human space. Millions of people who had never met Jake Morrison were demanding that their government take action to save the alien child who had trusted humanity with her story. Admiral Ross received orders from Earth to investigate the situation and take appropriate action. The orders were deliberately vague, giving her discretion to interpret appropriate action however she saw fit. Ross had seen the same leaked documents as everyone else, and she had experienced Zara's shared memories through her own crew members. As a military officer, Ross had sworn to protect innocent life. As a human being, she couldn't stand by and watch a child be executed for the crime of surviving genocide. She began assembling a task force that would either rescue Zara or die trying. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just Zara's fate, but the future of the Galactic Assembly itself. Humans throughout the galaxy were finally learning what their government had been doing in their name, and many of them didn't like what they saw. Jake Morrison had started this by refusing to let one alien child die alone in a cage. Now it had become something much larger than he ever imagined. The question was whether it would be large enough to actually change anything. Admiral Kate Ross arrived at the Assembly capital world with a fleet that surprised everyone, including herself. She had expected to lead a small task force of human ships, but when word spread about the mission, volunteers came from throughout human space. Merchant captains, mining ship crews, even civilian transport pilots had retrofitted their vessels with whatever weapons they could find and joined the fleet. More surprising was that humans weren't the only ones coming. Ships from a dozen different species had joined the formation, all demanding answers about the Assembly's hidden facilities. The insectoid hive mind had sent 3 of their largest vessels. Several refugee groups that had been hiding in the Outer Rim territories emerged from hiding to support the rescue mission. Elder Norum of the Galactic Assembly watched the approaching fleet with growing concern. He had expected that a few human ships might make a token protest about Zara's situation, but this looked like an invasion force. More troubling was the fact that several Assembly member species were represented in the fleet, suggesting that the political crisis was worse than anyone had realized. The Assembly offered to negotiate. They proposed releasing some of the surviving prisoners in exchange for continued human cooperation with assembly policies. They suggested that a limited investigation into Project Sanctuary might be acceptable if the humans would stop demanding access to all the hidden facilities. Admiral Ross transmitted humanity's response to the entire galaxy. The message was simple and direct. She said that humans didn't negotiate for people's right to exist. The assembly could release all the prisoners immediately, or the human fleet would come and get them. Elder Norum made the mistake of thinking that humans would back down when faced with the assembly's superior numbers. The assembly fleet was 3 times larger than the human force, with more advanced weapons and better trained crews. No rational species would attack when the odds were so heavily against them. But humans weren't being rational. They were being human. The battle that followed shocked the galaxy. Human ships employed tactics that other species considered insane. They used ramming attacks against larger vessels. They sent boarding parties into enemy ships even when it meant certain death for the attackers. They continued fighting even after their own ships were crippled and burning. To the assembly forces, these tactics seemed like the desperate actions of a primitive species that didn't understand modern warfare. To humans, they were just the tools you used when someone was threatening your family. Jake Morrison watched the battle from aboard Admiral Vex High's ship, where he was coordinating the rescue of prisoners from the assembly's hidden facilities. Vex High had honored his agreement and was using the battle as cover to attack the secret laboratories throughout assembly space. Jake had finally been reunited with Zara when Vex High's forces captured the facility where she was being held. She was weak from the transport and frightened by the sounds of battle, but she was alive. When she saw Jake, she pressed her hand against his and shared her relief and gratitude through her empathic connection. But Zara wasn't the only survivor they found. The facility contained dozens of beings from species that were supposedly extinct. Adult Villani, who had been used for breeding experiments. Children from other species who had been raised in captivity for research purposes. Elderly individuals who were kept alive only because they possessed knowledge that the assembly wanted to extract. As Jake helped coordinate the evacuation of the survivors, he began to understand the true scope of what the assembly had done. They hadn't just committed individual acts of murder or torture. They had systematically destroyed entire civilizations and then covered up their crimes by claiming that the extinctions were natural disasters or necessary security measures. The battle in space was turning as more assembly ships began to defect to the human side. The crews of these ships had heard Zara's story and seen the evidence of the hidden facilities. Many of them had never known that their government was committing genocide in their name, and they refused to continue fighting for a cause they could no longer support. The turning point came when Nekka, the hive mind representative, announced that their species was withdrawing all support for assembly operations. The hive mind controlled much of the galaxy's communication network, and their defection meant that news of the battle was being broadcast to every inhabited world in real time. Other species began to follow the hive mind's example. Worlds that had been loyal assembly members for generations declared their independence. Trade networks that had supported the assembly's economy shut down. Military units refused to follow orders from assembly command. Elder Norum found himself commanding a government that was dissolving around him. He authorized the use of the assembly's most powerful weapons against the human fleet, but it was too late. The political damage had already been done, and destroying the human ships would only make them into martyrs. Jake and Zara worked together during the final phase of the rescue operation. Zara's empathic abilities allowed her to locate other survivors who were hidden in facilities that weren't on any official records. Jake's technical skills helped him override security systems and life support equipment to keep the survivors alive during transport. As they rescued more survivors, Jake began to understand why the assembly had been so determined to eliminate these species. Each group they found possessed abilities or knowledge that could challenge the assembly's dominance. The Villani empathy was just one example. There were species with natural telepathic abilities, others with advanced medical knowledge, and some with technology that could revolutionize space travel. The assembly had been systematically destroying anyone who might offer an alternative to their vision of galactic civilization. They had used fear and propaganda to convince the galaxy that diversity was dangerous and that only centralized control could maintain peace. When the battle finally ended, the Galactic Assembly had effectively ceased to exist. Most member species had either withdrawn or demanded complete governmental restructuring. The surviving Assembly leadership was facing war crimes trials, and their hidden facilities were being opened for galactic inspection. Jake found himself in the unexpected position of being a hero to billions of people he had never met. He gave speeches to refugee groups and testified at assembly tribunals. But what he really wanted was to continue the work of finding other survivors. Zara chose to stay with Jake and his team, rather than returning to live with the other Villani survivors. She had grown up in human company, and she felt more comfortable with the humans who had risked everything to save her. The adult Villani understood her choice and blessed the partnership between their child and her guardian. The rescue operations continued for months as more hidden facilities were discovered throughout former assembly space. Each group of survivors they found added to the growing evidence of the assembly's crimes. Jake and Zara became the public faces of the rescue effort, traveling from world to world to help locate other victims. During these missions, Zara began to develop her abilities beyond simple empathy. She learned to interface with complex computer systems and use her connection to electronic networks to coordinate rescue operations across multiple star systems. She also discovered that she could share positive emotions as easily as she shared painful memories. Helping traumatized survivors begin the healing process, Jake watched Zara grow from a frightened child into a confident, young adult who used her abilities to help others. She never lost the kindness and trust that had first drawn him to protect her, but she gained the strength and wisdom to become a leader in her own right. The partnership between Jake and Zara became a symbol of what the galaxy could be when different species worked together instead of trying to dominate each other. They showed that cooperation was stronger than conquest, and that protecting the innocent was more important than maintaining power. As their work expanded, they were joined by other humans who shared their commitment to rescue operations. Lisa Grant left her medical career to become the team's chief medical officer. Commander Blake was released from prison and used his command experience to coordinate military support for rescue missions. Carol Stone and her mining crew provided logistical support and safe haven for survivors who needed time to recover. The team also included representatives from dozens of different species, all united by their commitment to finding and protecting survivors of the Assembly's genocide programs. They called themselves the Guardian Coalition, taking their name from the word that Zara had first used to describe Jake. Years later, as Jake and Zara prepared for another rescue mission to a newly discovered facility, they reflected on how much had changed since that night when Jake had first found her in the hidden laboratory. The galaxy was still healing from the wounds inflicted by the Assembly, but it was becoming a more diverse and tolerant place. Zara told Jake that her people had a saying about trees that shelter others growing strongest. She believed that humans understood this principle better than any species she had met. Humans became more dangerous when they were protecting others, not less. And this made them natural guardians for those who couldn't protect themselves. Jake smiled and told Zara that he had learned something too. He had discovered that the best way to honor the people you couldn't save was to make sure you saved everyone you possibly could. Every survivor they found, every hidden facility they shut down, every war criminal they brought to justice, was a victory for all the innocent people who had died before anyone could help them. As their ship headed toward the next mission, Jake Morrison and Zara looked out at the stars and saw a galaxy full of possibilities. There were still survivors to find, and still wrongs to right, but they were no longer working alone. They were part of something larger than themselves, something that would continue the work long after they were gone. The maintenance worker who had once fixed broken equipment in the depths of a forgotten space station had become something he'd never expected to be. He had become exactly what Zara had called him from the very beginning. He had become a guardian,